This is George Lees, just a few days after I've made those horrific videos on what is going on in Scotland with the Trident projects, how it's run by mercenary leaders, how it's run by a triumvirate of leaders who are running it from London, from Eccleston Square, and we're pretending.
Hanged heroes. The King of Scotland has died without a son, and the King of England, a cruel pagan known as Edward the Longshanks, claimed the throne of Scotland for himself. Scotland's nobles fought him and fought each other over the crown. So Longshanks invited them to talk.
I'm just going to show you what we do to people that fight for their country in a genuine campaign. That is the disembowelling of William Wallace, and how we now create the demonisation of innocent countries in the peace-loving nations who are actually being brutalised by NATO, so that we can continue to steal their geopolitical assets and to run their governments from the G8 nations and their capitals. I'm going to try and get you some footage of some of the scenes in Braveheart that are still portrayed.
Many years later, Edward the Longshanks, King of England, supervised the wedding of his eldest son, who would succeed him to the throne.
So we have childhood sweethearts, a man who spent time in exile, learning linguistics abroad, learning how to be decent, learning how to be a leader of his nation, and you have an occupying army from England, which is still in occupation.
That's suspicious.
Not suspicious as you were now.
behind me, Sergeant. Where are you going, lassie? Oh, that was heavy. Let me help you. Oh, you remind me of my daughter back home. Hello, Lassie.
Later in the film we see the rights of Prim Noctie to the people who law enforce by cutting the throats of raped victims, and later we see the ultimate sacrifice that Wallace himself played. The character that plays William Wallace is, I'm led to believe, a Jew and has been on rehabilitation, presumably because he gets guilt about his role in life. So they raped the girl, they had to marry in secret so that she would not be victimised by Prim Noctie.
All of you know full well the great pains I've always taken never to be too strict, too rigid with the application of our laws, and as a consequence, have we not learned to live together in relative peace and harmony? Huh? And this day's lawlessness is how you repay my leniency. Well, you leave me with little choice. An assault on the King's soldiers is the same as an assault on the King himself.
Okay, that brings us to Kate Adie. Kate Adie is a journalist in the British media, has been for a long time, a much respected figure in journalism. She's on the board of one of those companies that I cited for you out of Eccleston Road in London the other morning. I want to tell you some tragic stories about geopolitical manipulation in a historical context, but also in a modern day context. Now, I'll just point that at the tragic picture of the dying woman on Hollywood's version of Wallace's campaign, and I'm going to try and open up the sites that I have opened that reveal massive issues about wartime and naval issues that involve Hertfordshire, where I lived for a time very happily in a marital relationship with decent people, but I know now that almost the whole of Hertfordshire and almost everyone I worked with in the pharmaceutical industry, with several exceptions, have become embroiled in financial fraud. I will not cite all of the names, because they are just doing what peer pressure leads to. I will cite some of the key names in what effectively is national treason. Kate Adie is an international reporter. Catherine Adie is on the board of one of those companies that is a subsidiary of the Eccleston empires, or the Eccleston street empires that we talked about the other day, that take in Trident 3 and Trident 4 and Tim Spicer, the mercenary army leader. Now, if you're young, you may not remember K80 on air, and because I don't get any of the Sky News events now, and I don't watch the TV because I have no license, I can no longer afford a license, I do not miss the news. All of it is false. All of it is a false account of things that are still happening, like you saw in that Braveheart movie. The victims now are no longer in this country. We're effete. We've got bicycle helmets, we've got safety gear for everything. We put the soccer ball on a tee when we take a free kick in the modern game. Everything is dismembered. Everyone is incapable of having capability and independence because of the nanny state that we live in. The nanny state that we live in actually steals from the taxpayers who are loyalists to that nanny state, but they do not have the bottle to stand up against the quizzling politicians who are paid to dismember the sovereignty and the capability of our once great country. Okay, I've just got to open up these sites on my other computer now, and I will give you a little rundown on what I've found out on those companies that are run from the same place as Aegis Defence Systems Limited and the two Trident companies that Salmond did not dare mention. If Salmond had opened up on that, Scotland would be free, in inverted commas, were it not for the fact that Salmond was trying to obtain what he had already got. He was going to have to run the country on the British pound. He was going to have to run a constitutional monarchy, which we've already got, and he was going to get a bigger bung from Westminster than the one that we already get currently. It is just a total fudge, and I'm now going to try and take you back and show you what I've discovered since the weekend. And what I wanted to talk about in the naval context, take us back to the 16th century, and it also takes us back to Hertfordshire. I was quite stunned to find out some of the jokes that the New World Order, or the Old World Historical Order, perpetrate. You know how if you've got a leader of men for centuries, that they have a tendency to stick their hand inside their coat. Napoleon did it, Nelson did it, almost all the big leaders that you can think of, Wellington did it. It is a continuation into the Lord of the Rings film of the joke, what has he got in his pockets is? And then when you learn that they laugh at the name of the general, they change the gender of the general, as we've talked about in videos on the ownership and the directorships at Rio Tinto and British American Tobacco, using people that have Christian names that are female and other Christian names that are male in the same listing. And that's going to take us into the use of the word hilarious, and the joke of the use of the word hilarious in the Hillary word that has become so prominent in the conquering of Everest and the conquering of brutalized nations all over the world through the presence of hilarious Clinton. That's Mrs. Bill Clinton, the woman who led America into war and who fell down the stairs and broke her ankle because she was pretending that they were involved in a campaign of saving the embassy in Benghazi, which never actually existed, where one of the government agency teams killed Ambassador Stevens because they were involved in yet another financial tiff. Ambassador Stevens was homosexually raped before he was killed by his own people and his own diplomats, in inverted commas, in Benghazi. But let's take you back to history, because it's really tragic that this can occur for the whole of 500 to 600 years without any of the decent people or the genuine journalists in our country, who are owned by the same people as the mercenary armies and the moneylenders who own the monarchies in every European country, which then becomes every global country and every global central bank. I drone on about that theme every time I make a video, but I'm now going to take you back to, it's in a series called Fiscal Shit, and it takes us not to the fiscal shit in World War II on this occasion. Let's see if I can find it. But the battle I'm going to describe, which is particularly sad in the way that they laugh at it, is the Battle of Lagos off Portugal. Now Lagos, if you look for Lagos in Google Maps, you can no longer find it. And Lagos is right down at the south of Portugal, near the Twin Towers that we talked about the other day, which the Twin Towers originally were in the way into and out of the Mediterranean. So it's on one side it's the European continent, and that is of course Gibraltar. On the other side you have one of the either Algeria or I forget where the Casablanca film was made, but the other Twin Tower, the other mountain that was adjacent to Gibraltar has been over time eroded by acts of God or by volcanic action, and what I want to find is the evidence. Oh, here we go. Now all of this takes us back to the Christianity fraud, because Christianity was a fraud that was perpetrated in the 1st century AD, and what I've learned this morning is that there has been a triumvirate of people from Rome since Julius Caesar was in power, and up to yesterday I was making videos that portrayed Caesar as a hero, and Caesar may well still be a hero, but one has no way of knowing because of the manipulation that you get even in news events like Wikipedia. The original triumvirate that I believe now could well be linked into the religious fraud was formed by people called Gaius. Triumvirate. Let me just reel them off. Julius Caesar is one of them, and if you look at Julius Caesar and you think of his initials, you see that you have the letters JC, could be taken as Jesus Christ in a triumvirate. The triumvirate that was involved here includes Marcus Licinius Crassus. He's one of the rich entrepreneurial people in Rome. You've got Publius Licinius Crassus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. That's the original set of 3 that were in a position. One of them was Julius Caesar, the famous emperor who led the armies, and in 55 BC for a time was in Great Britain and was close to the borders region, where the wall was built just to the south of the English border, that was still there when we lived in Hexham in 2004, before we went off to New Zealand. Okay, now what I've found is that on those directors that inhabit the boardrooms in Eccleston Road, we have a company called Rubicon International Services Limited, and the links to the Trident and the spears, or the three-pronged hoof and the cloven hoof that is the symbol of the beast, you see the links to the devil, and you can see the links to what could be the creation of Christianity by people 55 years before the birth of Christ. And I know those names, Gaius and Crassus, come up in the Piso story. So you've got a lead time into a massive fraud. But I just want to explain how vicious the jokes are about the creation of Christian saints. And I'll start with St. Vincent, because St. Vincent was, I believe, a Hispanic saint, and he came from the region where the Battle of Lagos was fought. Now Lagos, if you look for Lagos in a search engine now, you get the Thriller in Manila or you get Lagos, the capital of one of those sub-Saharan African countries. You get no links at all to Lagos Bay in southern Portugal. We talk a lot about the Portuguese, we talk a lot about their involvement in the the jokes about Portuguese chefs in the Basel Faulty program, which is Faulty Towers. We talk about Portuguese leaders in the banking groups like Ortez, Orterio Ortez. He gets a massive salary to dismember the Lloyds banking group and to run scams like the Lloyds Verdi project, which dismembered the Co-op bank, although they claim now that they pulled out of it when they were in the process of giving themselves a loan to acquire 600 of their own branches. But what I discovered about the battle of the massive navies in the Battle of Lagos was that the admiral in charge of the French fleet, which were victorious on this occasion, was run by Admiral Anne A-N-N-E Hilarion de Tourville. And when I realised that that was de Tourville who led the French Navy, and only a year before the French had a calamitous defeat to the Spanish Navy and their allies. And what you see there is a continuation of the theme that I've described in the Bosporus, where in the Crimean War the French and British allies took their fleets in and they sank the boats in the harbour in the Crimea because they knew that the troops would not be going home. They were buried in shallow graves, and the conflict in the Crimea all those years ago, when we had the charge of the Light Brigade and botched campaigns like that, the culls were intentional. And when you see that it is hilarious if you send a woman called Anne under a wig in the role of a genocidal admiral, and then when you come home, you acknowledge the massive deceit of the people when the funders of that campaign rename one of the villages in Hertfordshire near their massive mansions and the money lending institutions that they create in the UK. They call that town Weston Turville. It is tragic. Only arrogant, deceitful traitors could run the world that way, and that's the way that the Rothschilds have run the world. And what I'm telling you is that when you see the name Hillary, what you should be seeing is the word hilarious. It's a legacy of a premeditated campaign, and I'm now going to try and show you what Wallace got at the end of his campaign. These bastards that are now trying to take us into World War III by demonizing Islam are now in a position to make movies about lopping people's heads off, and when they do that, we then deploy bombs. NATO's armies are now sent again into Iraq for the third time in a decade to try and put down Islamic menace that is created entirely in studios in Scotland. I've mentioned already that of the directors under the name Islam, I think which there are 1400 in the UK, several of them have directors called Mr. Islam. One or two of them is run out at Aberdeen, and Report in Scotland is particularly vicious in reporting these frauds. And let me just show you what happened to William Wallace at the end of his justified campaign.
Let this scrapper come to me.
Okay, so what we see now on the news most mornings are people having their head chopped off. The BBC are always on call. Fox News are always on call. The world's media, including the Reuters, which has been the Rothschild media for centuries,